By the time the second leg of the 1985 Milk Cup semi-final rolled around, the tie was already carrying far more baggage than a simple two-legged cup clash ever should. The first leg at Roker Park hadn't just produced a shock 2-0 Sunderland win, it had produced violence, real violence, the kind that left fractured skulls, a smashed-up stadium, and over 90 arrests in its wake. Around 6,000 Chelsea supporters travelled north that night, and they kicked off almost immediately. The decision to place large numbers of them directly above Sunderland supporters in the paddock proved disastrous. Throughout the match, missiles rained down, bottles, debris, anything that could be ripped loose and thrown. It wasn't all bad though. The drinks after the match were on the headhunters. They were launching 50p pieces at us all game. We filled our pockets. The worst of the violence that day happened outside the stadium. In Fulwell, a group of Chelsea headhunters forced their way into the Bluebell pub, a place packed with Sunderland supporters. What followed was a full-scale barroom battle. The bar was rammed, so most of us were in the lounge with couples and older blokes just trying to get a drink. Next thing, the Chelsea lot came storming in through the back entrance from the car park. People were leaving their drinks and legging it out, half the room cleared in seconds. A couple of our lads near the door started lobbing glasses at them. We were badly outnumbered. For a moment, I genuinely thought, when we run out of glasses, we're in for a kicking here. Then all of a sudden, backup arrived carrying pool cues. I'm sure the manager let them through from behind the bar because you couldn't get round otherwise. It turned into absolute chaos. A few of their lot ended up taking some serious hits from the cues. We heard later that 2 of them had fractured skulls. More than 100 arrests were made across the day and night, and tensions between the two sets of fans were at breaking point. So when Sunderland travelled to London for the second leg, they weren't just taking a 2-0 lead to Stamford Bridge. They were walking straight into an atmosphere that had been simmering for weeks. But for thousands of Sunderland supporters, it never really got started at all. Chelsea chairman Ken Bates had decided the match would not be all ticket. On the surface, that might have seemed like a way to maximise attendance at a ground that could still hold over 40,000 at the time. In reality, it was a decision that massively underestimated just how many Sunderland fans would make the journey. They came in huge numbers, well over 10,000, possibly closer to 12,000, on official coaches, private buses, cars, and anything else that could get them down the motorway. This was the mid-1980s. Big away followings for major cup ties were expected, especially from a club chasing its first final in over a decade. But as the scale of the travelling support became clear, police began stopping convoys of coaches miles from Stamford Bridge. As we drove through Watford, I remember seeing coach after coach pulled over by police at the side of the road. We later found out the coach drivers were threatened with arrest if they didn't turn around and head back home. I knew lads that hadn't missed a match, home or away for decades, who didn't make it to London. Absolute farce. For every fan that made it inside the ground that night, there were said to be 2 more who never got near it at all. And those who did get through faced another problem. Turnstiles were shut long before kickoff. Large numbers of Chelsea supporters were allowed into sections that Sunderland fans had expected to occupy, while away supporters arriving late were simply told the ground was full and pushed away by police. It was nearing kickoff time when we approached Stamford Bridge. It was gridlocked, and as we sat waiting, a mob of about 300 lads appeared and walked alongside the bus. We thought they were Chelsea and expected a few windows to go in, then they rolled up their sleeves to show West Ham tattoos. They disappeared into the distance, and we eventually found the coach park. Outside the ground was absolute chaos. I was refused entry and just launched myself over the turnstile. All my mates followed. There wasn't enough police to stop us all. Sunderland had officially been allocated around 2,000 seats and access to a terrace that could hold close to 10,000. In theory, that should have allowed for clear separation between the two sets of supporters. In reality, segregation on the night was loose at best and non-existent at worst. Chelsea fans drifted into areas near the Sunderland sections, while some parts of the ground were left strangely sparse, acting as makeshift buffer zones rather than properly policed divides. Reports from those inside describe entire blocks where the two groups were separated only by thin lines of stewards, and in some cases, by nothing more than empty rows of seats. Missiles were flying before the game had even kicked off. Every time something came flying at us, we'd give it back. I saw blokes pulling up bits of loose concrete near the crush barriers and launching it just to make the point. They weren't going to stand there and take it. One lad picked up a slab the size of a dinner plate, spun round like it was a discus, and sent it flying. It smashed into the barrier and exploded into bits, covering the Chelsea lot in concrete. Not proud of it, but that's how ugly it was. On the pitch, Chelsea struck first through David Speedy, briefly lifting the home crowd and giving them hope of overturning the 2-0 deficit from the first leg. But the tie swung back towards Sunderland before half-time when former Chelsea forward Clive Walker equalised on the night and restored the 2-goal aggregate cushion. The frustration inside Stamford Bridge began to turn nasty. Chelsea fans started to surge forward in their sections, while stewards and police moved uneasily along the touchlines. The game carried on, but the atmosphere had clearly shifted. The second half is when everything finally snapped. Chelsea fans repeatedly ran onto the pitch, only to be chased off by the waiting mounted police. Just after the hour mark, Clive Walker struck again. It was the sort of goal that doesn't just change a match, it kills it stone dead, and the Chelsea fans knew it. The dream of a comeback was over, and almost immediately, the mood in the ground shifted from frustration to fury. Supporters began spilling forward from the stands in waves. They ran along the touchline, brandishing pieces of broken seating like they were spears. Play was briefly halted as stewards and officers tried to regain control. Mounted police mowed people down as they tried to disperse the mobs. The game would continue, but it was now being played in the middle of what felt less like a football match and more like a public order emergency. At one point, a pitch invader sprinted towards Clive Walker and attempted to strike him. The Sunderland players and officials reacted quickly, intervening before any serious harm could be done, but the image summed up just how far things had spiraled beyond control. Then, amongst the chaos, Colin West put the result well beyond doubt. My mate got kicked by a horse when we were trying to get through the turnstiles, so we ended up in a pub listening to the match on the radio. When the third goal went in, I distinctly remember the radio commentator saying that a horse had taken up a better position in the box than Colin West had. Chelsea would pull one back late on through Pat Nevin, but nobody really noticed. When the final whistle eventually sounded, there were no triumphant celebrations from the Sunderland players. Instead, they sprinted straight for the tunnel, fully aware that the safest place in Stamford Bridge that night was as far away from the terraces as possible. We were surrounded by Chelsea fans, so we hardly spoke to each other all match, but when the final whistle went and we were heading to Wembley, we couldn't keep quiet any longer. Despite our best Dick Van Dyke impressions, somebody sussed our northern accents and we ended up having to leg it out of the ground. We managed to get back to the buses, but by the time we pulled out, there was pockets of fighting all around us. The windows on our bus got put through, so it was a freezing journey back up to Sunderland.
Well, my colleague Roger Thames actually went down with a coachload of Sunderland supporters. Roger, what was it actually like at the game? We've read about it, we've seen the pictures. What was it like at the game itself?
It was basically frightening. Everybody that I was with did not enjoy the occasion. They'd gone down there obviously to see Sunderland win, but there was no celebrations on the coach. They were just very pleased to get back on it. Certainly, I came out of the ground with one supporter and made a comment to him, and he was literally too frightened to answer because he thought that his Wearside accent would give him away, and he didn't want to face the consequences.
At least you'll be all right with your London.
Well, quite. It was I was like the interpreter almost.
Reports from the night described running battles breaking out around Fulham Broadway, with officers trying to shepherd Sunderland supporters out of the area, while also containing pockets of agitated Chelsea fans leaving the ground. And then came the most notorious offshoot of the evening, the incident at Parsons Green. West Ham had been away at Wimbledon in the FA Cup, and a number of their supporters were travelling back across London on the Underground. Some Chelsea headhunters lay in wait along the District line, anticipating their arrival. When one of their trains reached Parsons Green, violence broke out on the platforms and surrounding areas. The scrap was serious enough that services were affected, leaving many ordinary passengers and football supporters alike stranded in an increasingly tense environment. For Sunderland fans trying to leave the area, this only added another layer of danger and confusion. Some groups escorted towards tube stations found services halted or inaccessible, forcing them to improvise routes out of the city. The headlines the following morning weren't about Sunderland reaching Wembley, they were about the chaos. More than 100 people had been arrested in connection with the disorder, and around 40 were injured, including over 20 police officers caught up in the violence inside and outside the ground. One steward suffered a serious head wound after being struck by a seat ripped from the stands. And yet, despite all the carnage, Ken Bates still managed to steal the show. After describing his own club's fans as scum and animals, he reportedly tried to get an injunction out to stop the riot footage from being broadcast.
By the way, you may remember I told you last night that TV cameras would not be covering the Chelsea match because their chairman, Ken Bates, wanted £20,000 for 2 minutes of highlights. But he didn't like those pictures of the riots we've just shown you either, and they were shot by a video company. This afternoon, he tried to obtain a High Court injunction against our colleagues at Thames Television in London, preventing them from showing the pictures. He failed and was ordered to pay costs.
He also refused to dish out any lifetime bans, opting instead to merely move the troublemakers further back into the terrace, where they could apparently be more easily monitored. A few weeks later, he decided to install a 12-foot electric fence in Stamford Bridge. Yes, seriously. It was never switched on due to legal threats from the council and widespread condemnation, but still, I think bans would have been the more humane option, Ken.
He got the idea from his dairy farm, and he hopes that a short, sharp shot from the wire which controls his cattle will have the same effect on soccer hooligans.
I can't quite understand why you've all got this sudden compassion for hooligans. I mean, you were the lot that were screaming for their blood a month ago. Now there's a possibility they might get a little burn mark on their finger. You're worried about it. I applaud your public interest.
The tour of inspection of the defences, which wouldn't have disgraced a prisoner of war camp, was interrupted by a reporter who tried to scale the fence. Mr. Bates was delighted that the first attempt to invade the pitch ended in failure.